What kind of woman steps off a stagecoach in the dead of a Montana winter carrying a leather medical bag, a loaded Remington, and a secret that could hang her for fraud? Poker. Celine Miller wasn't running toward a fairy tale when she answered that mail order bride advertisement. She was running from the ashes of her father's burned laboratory and toward a dying ranch owned by a desperate man who'd never know her real name. Not until it was too late to send her back. The year was 1883. The Bitterroot Valley was bleeding. Cattle were dropping dead from a plague no one could see, no one could fight, and no one could stop. Except maybe a woman with a microscope, if the mountain man would let her try. The cattle baron circling his land didn't kill them both first. 6 months earlier, Celine had watched her father die in Pennsylvania. Not from bullets or disease, but from a broken heart. The night they burned his laboratory, she'd been inside working late. She'd been bent over glass slides, making careful measurements of parasites. The smell hit her first. Kerosene and torch smoke under the door. Her father grabbed her arm, shoved her toward the back window hard. "Take the journals," he'd commanded. "Take the microscope. Everything we've proven. Run, Celine. Don't let them erase the truth we've discovered together." She'd climbed through that window with flames licking at her skirts. She turned back once to see him silhouetted against orange fire. He was trying to save his life's work with bare hands, trying to rescue papers and specimens from the inferno with hope. The hired men watched from the street outside, laughing at him. They passed a whiskey bottle while a genius burned his hands. Dr. Harrison Miller lasted 1 month after that terrible night in Philadelphia. Long enough to see his name dragged through every Eastern newspaper. Long enough to hear colleagues call him a butcher and fraud. Long enough to watch his reputation die before his body followed. Short enough that Celine never got to tell him the truth. She never said she'd prove them all wrong someday, somehow. She carried that promise west along with his microscope and journals. She carried a rage cold enough to survive any Montana winter. The Wells Fargo stagecoach rattled into Stevensville on a frozen November afternoon. Celine pressed her gloved hands against the frosted window, peering out. She watched the rough timber buildings take shape through crystalline air. This wasn't Philadelphia. This wasn't even civilization by Eastern standards at all. This was the edge of the world. That's exactly what she needed. "Stevensville, folks," Jeremiah Cobb called out. End of the line for today. Missoula Run continues tomorrow. If the mountain pass don't close overnight. The other passengers gathered their belongings quickly, seeking warmth and supper. Celine waited. Let them climb down first, away from her. Let them stop staring at the woman traveling alone with heavy trunks. She'd felt their curiosity for 3 days rattling across territorial roads. Felt their unasked questions about a woman her age heading west. A woman alone wasn't proper, wasn't safe. It simply wasn't done. She didn't care what wasn't done. She cared about what needed doing. Jeremiah appeared at the coach door and offered his weathered hand. "Miss Harding." "Was it? You got folks meeting you here in town?" "I expect so," Celine said, stepping down onto frozen mud below. Her boots hit the ground with a solid crunch of ice. The cold hit her like a fist, sharp and clean and unforgiving. She loved it immediately. This was freedom from Eastern society's rules. The old driver hauled her trunks down with a grunt of effort. "Lord Almighty, ma'am, what you got in these heavy things? Anvils? Books?" The lie came smooth as silk from her practiced lips. "A woman must come prepared for the wilderness. Mr. Cobb, you see. A simple life rarely means an easy one out here," she added. "That's truth spoken plain, miss," he agreed, studying her with knowing eyes. "You're Montgomery's mail order bride. That's the talk around town anyhow, is it?" Celine kept her voice neutral and pleasant, giving nothing away. "It is?" Jeremiah lowered his voice, like sharing a secret or warning. "Gabe Montgomery's a good man. Hard man, but good through and through. He's had a devil's share of trouble this year, losing cattle, losing them to some sickness nobody can name or stop properly." "How unfortunate," Celine said, her heart racing beneath calm exterior, been bleeding him dry financially. "That's why he sent for a wife. Man gets desperate enough. He wants someone to witness his stand." Jeremiah paused, searching her face with concern in his old eyes. You sure about this, miss? City woman like you heading into wilderness? Winter's just starting up here. Gets brutal come January, they say. Celine turned to face him fully, letting him see steel in her eyes. Mr. Cobb, I didn't come here for comfort or an easy life. I came for sanctuary. There's a difference between those two things. Before he could respond, a voice cut through the cold mountain air. Miss Harding, it wasn't a question at all. It was a statement of fact, deep and rough, carrying authority from surviving alone in brutal country. Celine turned slowly toward the voice that commanded the frozen air. Gabe Montgomery stood in shadow beside the mercantile building's rough wall. A massive silhouette of a man wrapped in bearskin and worn denim. His beard was thick and dark. His face weathered into deep lines, lines carved by sun and sorrow over many hard years. He didn't step into the light, just waited there, watching her carefully, watching with slate-gray eyes that missed nothing and forgave even less. She lifted her chin, met that stare without flinching or looking away. Mr. Montgomery, I presume, she said clearly, her voice carrying well. Ma'am. He touched the brim of his wide hat in acknowledgment. Then he stepped forward into the dying afternoon light at last. He was bigger than she'd expected from his letters and description, taller, broader, more overwhelming in physical presence than she'd imagined before. His hands looked like they could snap timber with casual strength, or cradle something fragile with surprising gentleness if he chose to. She couldn't tell which yet. That would take time to discover. You brought a lot of baggage for seeking a simple life. His eyes moved to the heavy trunks, suspicion flickering across his features. A woman must come prepared, Mr. Montgomery. She repeated her line. Simple doesn't mean unprepared for what lies ahead in wilderness. Something that might have been a smile tugged his mouth corner. Gone too fast to be certain she'd actually seen it there. Fair enough, he said, bending to lift both trunks like they weighed nothing. Pure muscle and strength earned through years of brutal physical labor. I've got Goliath tied at the post. 2-hour ride to Broken Ridge. We should leave before dark falls over these mountains completely. Goliath turned out to be a draft horse the size of a small mountain, black as midnight and patient as stone, standing perfectly still. Gabe loaded the trunks onto a pack mule without comment or complaint, then turned to help Celine mount the massive horse before them. His hands gripped her waist, large and warm even through heavy wool. He lifted her onto Goliath's back like she weighed absolutely nothing at all. For one moment they were close enough she could smell him clearly, pine smoke and leather and something clean like snow and open air. Then he swung up behind her, settled into the saddle with practiced ease. His arms came around her to take the reins in strong hands. You'll want to hold on, he said quietly near her ear. Trail gets rough in places. Once we leave town behind us. Celine gripped the saddle horn, felt his heat at her back solid. They rode out of Stevensville in complete silence together. The trail climbed into towering pines that closed around them like walls, like cathedral walls, reaching up toward the darkening sky above their heads. The temperature dropped with every mile they traveled into the mountains. The world narrowed to hooves crunching on frozen ground and breathing. Just the sound of their breathing in the brittle, crystalline air. Celine had never felt so far from Philadelphia in her entire life. She'd never felt so free from society's constraints and judgments either. 30 minutes into the ride, Gabe finally spoke to her directly. I need to be plain with you, Miss Harding. His voice rumbled. She felt it as much as heard it against her back. Please do, she said simply, waiting for him to continue speaking. The letters I wrote you, they were true when I penned them, but things have changed since then, changed significantly for the worse. Celine waited. Let him find the words in his own time. There's a sickness taking my herd. Started 4 months back in summer. Cattle just waste away. Get hollow-eyed and weak, then drop dead. Lost near 40 head so far. It's destroying everything I've built. She'd read about such things in her father's detailed research journals. She kept her voice carefully neutral, revealing nothing she knew yet. That's a significant loss for any ranch. she said with sympathy. It's ruin. The word was flat, final, hopeless in its certainty. I'm 3 weeks from foreclosure. The bank's already sent official notice, and there's a man named Josiah Rutherford, cattle baron from Missoula. He's been buying up dying ranches for pennies on the dollar, and he wants yours. Celine finished for him, understanding the pattern. He does. Sent his men 3 times already to pressure me. Last time I fired a Winchester rifle over their heads clearly. But bullets can't kill a plague. Pride can't pay the bank. Celine felt the tension in his body, the shame of confessing failure. So I ain't offering you a future anymore, Miss Harding. Truth is, just a front row seat to a funeral if you stay here. If you want me to turn this horse around tomorrow morning, put you back on that stage, Coach East, I'll understand completely. Won't hold it against you for changing your mind about this. She'd expected tears at this point from most women he'd known, expected her to demand he turn around immediately and take her back. Instead, Celine shifted her weight slightly in the saddle before him. Let her arms wrap a fraction tighter around the saddle horn. I did not come for your money, Mr. Montgomery, she said clearly. No? Suspicion crept into his voice. Then what did you come for? Sanctuary. The word fell soft as snow between them in air. The mountains don't judge. The wilderness doesn't care about scandal or rumors. Doesn't care what society deems proper for women like me back east. I came for the freedom to exist without apology or explanation. Silence stretched out long between them as Goliath continued walking forward. She could feel him processing this, trying to understand her completely traying, to decide if she was naive or honest or something else. That's a peculiar thing to want, he said finally, uncertainty clear, perhaps. But it's the truth, she replied, with complete honesty now. And as for funerals, she kept her voice calm, almost casual. I have attended enough for one lifetime, Mr. Montgomery. Believe me. We will see about your dying ranch. It may not be finished. He didn't respond to that. But his posture shifted slightly behind her. Some of the tension bled out of his shoulders and back. They rode the rest of the way in silence that felt different, less hostile. More like two people carrying separate burdens, walking together, walking parallel paths toward an uncertain destination neither could see yet. Broken ridge appeared through the trees like something from a fading dream. The main cabin was solid, built from thick pine logs and chinked. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. Lamplight glowed warm through paper windows. Beyond the cabin, Celine could see the truth of this place. Fences sagging, empty corrals, a barn that desperately needed repair work. And in the lower pasture, dark shapes that didn't move at all. Dead cattle. 3 of them, frozen in positions where they'd fallen. Gabe saw her, looking. Said nothing, jaw clenched tight with shame. He helped her down from Goliath. His hands lingered at her waist, just a moment longer than necessary. Then he stepped back quickly. I'll get your trunks inside. Room at the back has clean sheets. Stove should keep it warm enough through the night, he said. Thank you, Celine replied, watching him carefully in fading light. I'll sleep in the barn. Propriety and all that, he muttered. We can figure out the rest come morning when we're both rested. Celine wanted to tell him the barn was foolish in winter. That propriety meant nothing when survival was at stake for both. But she held her tongue. Some battles weren't worth fighting tonight. She watched him haul her trunks inside with that powerful strength, watched him move with controlled power, from years doing hard things alone. Then she turned and looked out at the dying land spread before her. 3 days, she thought. I have 3 days to earn his trust, to prove the cure works, to save this ranch in Father's name. 3 days before Rutherford comes to take it all away from him. She touched the small brass key hanging on a chain around her neck, the key to her locked medical bag with all its secrets inside. Soon, Mr. Montgomery. Soon you'll know exactly who I really am and what I came here to do for both of us. But not tonight. Tonight, she'd let him believe the mail order story. The truth could wait until morning light revealed everything clearly. Celine woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke drifting through. The room was small but clean. A narrow bed and simple washstand. A single window looking out toward the mountains rising in distance. Her trunk sat against the wall, unopened, locked with brass mechanisms. She dressed quickly in practical wool, pinned her mahogany hair back severely, splashed ice-cold water on her face from the basin, gasping softly. When she emerged into the main room, Gabe stood at the stove, frying bacon and eggs in a cast-iron pan with practiced movements. He glanced up, nodded once. "Morning," he said simply without more. "Good morning," she replied, hesitating in the doorway, uncertain of welcome. "Can I help?" she offered, wanting to be useful from the start. "Coffee's hot." "Cups are on the shelf," he gestured with spatula. They moved around each other carefully, like two wary animals sharing territory. She poured coffee. He plated food. They sat at opposite table ends, the silence stretched, not hostile, just uncertain and new between them. Finally, Gabe spoke. "I'll be riding out to check the herd. After breakfast, you're welcome to come. Or stay here. Your choice entirely. I'd like to come." "If that's acceptable to you," she said. He studied her over the rim of his coffee cup for a moment. "You know how to ride?" he asked, testing her claims about preparation. "Well enough," she answered honestly, meeting his eyes without flinching away. "Then we leave in 20 minutes. Dress warm. It's brutal out there." The lower pasture was worse than Celine had imagined from distance. Not just 3 dead cattle, 5, and 2 more with that hollow look. The look her father had described in his journals so precisely, the look of animals drowning from the inside, suffocating on parasites. Gabe dismounted, walked to the nearest carcass, knelt in frozen mud, started with just one back in July. Thought it was bad feed or age. Then another and another. His voice was stripped and raw. "Now it's every week, sometimes every day. I can't stop it." Celine slid down from her horse, moved closer, forced herself to look. The dead animal's hide was covered in strange hard-shelled ticks everywhere, swollen, dark. Wrong. It shouldn't be here in Montana at all. Her pulse quickened. She knew these, had seen them under father's microscope. Bophilis annulatus, Texas fever ticks. They belonged in the South only, not here, not in Montana, not in November's freezing cold weather. The locals call it blood fever. Gabe continued, voice empty and defeated. Some kind of curse, they say. God's punishment. Devil's work, they claim. Take your pick of superstitions. None of them help me save cattle. Celine knelt beside him, pretended to examine the animal with curiosity, not as a trained researcher who'd spent years studying this exact pathology. "What do you call it?" she asked softly, watching his face carefully. "I call it the end of everything I built here," he said. He stood, brushed frozen mud from his knees with rough, damaged hands. 10 years I fought this land. Bears, blizzards, drought. I survived it. Now something I can't even see is taking it all down. The helplessness in his voice cut deeper than any anger could have. Celine stood, met his eyes. "Gabe, may I ask you something important?" "Gabe, if we're going to watch this place die together, use names." "Gabe, then." She paused. "Do you believe in unexpected solutions sometimes?" He frowned. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, with confusion, I mean. She chose her words carefully. "Sometimes the answer isn't expected, isn't where we'd normally look. Do you have courage to trust unfamiliar? You talking about prayer? Because I've tried that already, believe me. No, not prayer." She held his gaze. "I'm talking about admitting something. Admitting that the way you've always done things might not work. That there might be another way. A better way you haven't considered." Gabe studied her for a long moment. She could see him thinking. See him trying to figure her out. This strange Eastern woman speaking riddles. "I reckon I don't have much choice," he said finally with resignation. "A drowning man doesn't argue about the rope thrown to him." "No." Celine smiled faintly. "He doesn't argue. He grabs it tight." She turned back to look at the dead cattle and their ticks. "Soon," she thought. "Soon I'll tell you about the rope I've brought, about the cure that could save this place from total destruction. But first, you need to trust me, and trust takes time. Time we don't have much of, but enough. Just barely enough." That evening, Celine asked if she could learn to shoot a rifle. Gabe looked up from his coffee. Surprise flickered across his weathered face. "Shoot," he repeated, as if he'd misheard her simple request completely. "Yes, a rifle, preferably. If I'm going to live here, I should know how to defend this ranch. And myself," she added with determination. Most city women I've met faint at the sound of gunfire. I'm not most women, she said simply, meeting his eyes with confidence. Something that might have been respect glinted in his gray eyes then. No, I don't reckon you are, he agreed, a small smile forming. He took her out behind the cabin as the sun started sinking, set up a row of tin cans on fence posts for targets, showed her how to hold the heavy Sharps rifle with proper form, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze trigger. His hands adjusted her stance, corrected her grip with gentle but firm pressure. Each touch was brief, professional, but Celine felt the warmth of them. It's going to kick hard, he warned. Don't let it surprise you. She fired. The rifle roared loud. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. The bullet sailed wide, missing the can by several feet completely. Again, he said simply, not criticizing her miss at all, just teaching. She fired 3 more times, getting closer each time, learning the weapon. On her 6th shot, a can exploded off the fence post. Gabe let out a low whistle. 200 yards. That's damn fine shooting. For a first day, he added, genuine admiration in his rough voice. Celine lowered the rifle. Her shoulder ached. Her ears rang from noise. She had never felt more alive than in this moment under Montana sky. Teach me more, she requested, wanting to prove herself to him. They stayed out until the light failed completely, darkness closing in, until her shoulder was one massive bruise, and she hit targets consistently. When they finally walked back to the cabin, Gabe spoke quietly. You're not what I expected, Celine Harding, he admitted to her. What did you expect? She asked, curious about his assumptions about her. Someone soft, someone who'd cry when things got hard and beg home, and instead, she pressed, wanting to hear his honest assessment now. He stopped walking, turned to face her in the gathering darkness. Instead, I got someone who looks death in the eye unflinching, someone who wants to learn to fight, not run away screaming. Is that a problem? She asked, holding her breath for his answer. No, he said it slow, thoughtful. I think it might be exactly what's needed, what this place needs. What I need, he added, almost to himself. They stood there in the cold. 2 people slowly circling each other, trying to decide what kind of alliance they were building between them. Finally, Gabe cleared his throat. I'll teach you more tomorrow. If you want, I want, she confirmed immediately, eager to continue learning from him. Good. He started toward the barn. Stopped. Celine? He called back. Yes, she answered, turning to face him in dimming light completely. Thank you for not running, for staying even when I gave truth. She watched him walk away. This mountain of a man brought low by invisible enemies he couldn't fight with strength alone. I'm not here to run, Gabe, she said softly. Too quiet to hear. I'm here to fight. And I brought weapons you can't imagine yet. That night, Celine sat by the fireplace with Father's leather journal. The pages were filled with his precise handwriting and detailed observations, diagrams of tick anatomy, notes on life cycle patterns in different climates, calculations for arsenic compounds that could kill parasites without poisoning hosts, and on the final page, dated the week before he died, the truth is simple. Texas fever is not carried by air, not by water. It is transmitted by the Boophilus tick only. The cattle barons refuse to accept this because it means quarantine, it means halting their drives. It means profit loss they won't accept. They will destroy anyone who speaks this truth. They already have destroyed. To my daughter, if you're reading this after I'm gone, remember, don't let them win. The cure exists. The science is completely sound. Find someone desperate enough to let you try. Prove what they burned. Your loving father, Harrison Miller. Celine traced the words with her fingertip. Felt tears threaten, but pushed back. I found him. Papa, she whispered to the empty room around her. A desperate man with a dying ranch and nothing left to lose. Just like you said. Just like you told me to find. Outside, the Montana wind howled through the pines. Cold and clean air, completely indifferent to human suffering or scientific truth or anything else. Inside, Celine closed the journal, locked it back in her trunk safely. The key went back around her neck on its thin chain. Tomorrow, she'd examine those ticks more closely. Confirm what she already knew. Start preparing the cure in secret, mixing chemicals carefully and precisely. and when the time was right. When Gabe trusted her enough, truly, she'd open that medical bag and show him what a woman could do. She'd save this ranch, clear her father's name from false accusations completely, and prove that science, even in a woman's hands, could beat everything, beat superstition, greed, and death itself if applied correctly and bravely. All she needed was 3 days. Just 3 days to prove it, and the courage to tell a mountain man the complete truth. The fire crackled. Celine pulled her shawl tighter against cold air seeping and began to plan her war against invisible enemies and visible ones. The next 5 days passed in a careful dance of boundaries. Celine learned the rhythms of the ranch, learned Gabe's patterns and habits, learned that he woke before dawn to check the herd religiously, that he took his coffee black and his silence long and deep, that he worked until exhaustion claimed him, then slept in the barn, slept like a man afraid to claim comfort he didn't deserve. She learned to cook on the massive cast-iron stove without burning, bake bread that actually rose, mend his torn work shirts invisibly, and every night, after he'd gone to the barn in darkness, she'd unlock her medical trunk, study her father's journals by firelight carefully, examine the tick specimens she'd collected from the dead cattle secretly, confirming what she already knew, planning what came next in detail. On the 3rd morning, Gabe found her in the pasture at dawn, kneeling beside a freshly dead calf, her hands moving over the hide. Another one. His voice was flat, emptied of everything but acceptance. Celine looked up. How old was she? She asked, needing the information. 6 months. Born in May. Should have had years ahead of her. He crouched beside Celine, ran a hand over the calf's stiff flank. That's 12 this month. I'm hemorrhaging cattle faster than I count them. Celine watched his face, saw the lines deepen around his gray eyes, the way his jaw clenched against emotion he wouldn't let surface yet. Tell me about when it started, she said quietly, watching him carefully. The very first animal. You remember it clearly? She pressed gently. Course I remember. Big red steer named Samson. Tuckest bastard around. Gabe's voice went distant. Remembering. Found him down by the watering hole in July. Thought maybe he got into bad forage or something. But then his eyes went hollow. Hide started crawling with ticks everywhere. 3 days later he was dead, just like this one here and the ticks. Did you notice them before the sickness started, or only after? She asked, trying to establish the timeline precisely. Gabe frowned. After, I think. Why does that matter at all? Just curious. She kept her voice casual. Back east, my father used to say every problem has a pattern. You just look close. Your father sounds like he was a wise man, Gabe said. He was. The past tense sat heavy in her throat like stone. He died 6 months ago, she added, giving him that truth at least. Gabe's expression softened. I'm sorry for your loss, Celine. Truly sorry. So am I, she replied, looking back at the dead calf below them. They knelt there in the frozen mud, 2 people carrying fresh grief, understanding without needing to explain it to each other at all. Finally, Gabe stood, offered his hand, pulled her up with strength. Come on. I'll teach you to saddle a horse proper today, since you're hell-bent on learning everything about this place quickly. I am, she confirmed, grateful for the change of subject from death. Why? The question came sudden, direct. Why do you care so much? Care about a dying ranch in the middle of nowhere, Montana? Celine met his eyes. Chose truth where she could give it safely. Because you care. And I've spent too long around people back east. People who didn't care about anything real. Anything that mattered at all. Something shifted in his face. A wall coming down. Just a fraction. That why you left Philadelphia? He asked, probing gently but directly. Part of it, she admitted, keeping some secret still locked inside. What's the other part? He pressed, wanting to understand her completely. She smiled faintly. Ask me again in a week, when you know me. Fair enough. He started toward the barn, paused. I will ask. I'm a patient man. But I don't like mysteries under my roof, I know. She followed him through the snow. And when time's right, I'll give you answers. I promise you that much, she said. That afternoon, riders came. 4 horses moving fast across frozen ground. Celine heard them before she saw them. The drum of hooves approaching. She was in the cabin. kneading bread dough. She wiped flour away, moved to the window. 4 men on horseback, well dressed for frontier, heavy wool dusters, good horses, the kind of men who didn't work. Gabe was already on the porch, Winchester rifle cradled in his arms, not aimed, not yet, but ready. Waiting, watching them come closer. The riders emerged from the tree line like wolves, stalking prey carefully. The lead rider was older, 50 maybe, silver hair beneath expensive hat. He carried a silver-tipped walking cane across his saddle horn-like weapon, and his smile was the kind that never touched the eyes at all. Josiah Rutherford. Had to be. Celine's hand moved to her coat pocket, to the small Remington Derringer she'd started carrying after shooting lessons. Montgomery? Rutherford's voice carried false cheer across the cold air clearly. Fine morning, isn't it? He called, reining his black horse to stop. What do you want, Josiah? Gabe's voice was granite, hard, unyielding completely. I've got nothing to say to you, nothing at all worth saying. Now, that's no way to greet a concerned neighbor visiting you. Rutherford stopped 20 feet from the porch. His 3 men fanned out, hands resting near holstered guns, threat implicit, clear, unmistakable to all. I heard you lost more cattle. Thought I'd ride out personally today. Make sure you're considering my offer seriously now, he said smoothly. I'm not, Gabe said flatly. Rifle still cradled but finger near trigger. Gabe, be reasonable. The bank sent notice. 3 weeks before foreclosure comes, I'm offering you a fair price. Enough to clear debts. Start fresh. Fair price. Gabe's laugh was bitter. You're offering pennies on the dollar for land worth 10 times that? Don't insult my intelligence, Rutherford. The land's not worth anything if the cattle are all dead. Rutherford's smile thinned. And they will be. Whatever's killing them won't stop. You know that. I know that. Why not salvage what you can? Because this is my land. Built it with my own hands alone. I'm not handing it over to a vulture just because times are hard. Rutherford's eyes narrowed. Then they shifted, caught sight of Celine watching. Well, well. Rumor was true. You got yourself a mail-order bride. He leaned forward in his saddle, studied her with a gaze that crawled. Pretty thing. Shame to drag her into your squalor. Montgomery, don't think a woman like that deserves better than watching. You lose everything here. That's when Celine stepped onto the porch. Didn't hesitate. Didn't wait. Just walked straight out into the cold. The Derringer held steady, aimed squarely at the bridge of Rutherford's nose with unwavering hand. The silence that followed was absolute. Complete, shocked and tense, Mr. Rutherford. Her voice was calm, clear. Refined Eastern education wrapped steel, Pennsylvania. We shoot trespassers who threaten our livestock and husbands. I suggest you turn that horse around. If you return uninvited, I will put a bullet through your eye and dissect your brain. Under my microscope, she added, making the threat oddly specific and memorable. One of the hired men's hands twitched toward his holstered gun. Celine shifted her aim. I wouldn't. I can shoot wings off flies. Imagine what I'll do to something as large as your hand. Gabe was staring at her. She could feel his shock radiating outward. Rutherford's face flushed dark red. The false cheer vanished completely now, replaced by something cold and calculating and genuinely dangerous beneath surface. You've got 3 weeks, Montgomery, he said quietly, voice stripped of pretense. When the bank takes this land, I'll be waiting for you there, and your little Philadelphia whore won't stop me with parlor tricks. Get off my property. Gabe's voice dropped to a register promising violence now. Before I stop being neighborly and start being deadly serious. Rutherford yanked his reins. His horse danced sideways. 3 weeks then we'll see who's left standing in this valley. Montgomery. He turned and rode off. His 3 men following behind him. One of them looked back, eyes lingering on Celine with fearful respect. When the hoofbeats faded, Gabe finally spoke to her clearly. You carry a Derringer, he said, voice strange and tight with surprise. I do, she confirmed, lowering the gun, slipping it back into pocket. And you threatened to dissect his brain. He continued, almost laughing now. I did, she said simply, meeting his eyes without apology or shame. Under a microscope, he added, shaking his head in amazement at her. Celine smiled faintly. I assumed the oddly specific threat would be memorable. More memorable than a generic one. Psychology, you see, she explained. Gabe stared at her. Then, impossibly, he laughed. Deep and genuine sound. The first real laugh she'd heard from him since her arrival here. Christ, woman. You're either the bravest soul I've met or craziest. Perhaps both, she suggested, allowing herself a small smile in return. He shook his head, still smiling. Come inside before you freeze solids. I'll make fresh coffee. And you're going to tell me something. Tell me where a mail-order bride learned to threaten cattle barons, learned to threaten them like a gunslinger from the old stories. My father taught me. Truth, where she could give it to him. He believed women should be able to defend themselves. And their convictions. Your father raised a hellraiser, Gabe said, admiration clear in voice. He raised a fighter. Celine met his eyes. There's a difference between those. Day 11, Tuesday. The crisis came sudden and without warning to them. Thunder, the massive breeding bull, collapsed near the watering hole hard, Gabe's prize animal. The last hope for rebuilding the herd completely, foundation of everything. Now thrashing weakly in frozen mud below, Gabe stood over the gasping animal. His jaw clenched so hard teeth ached. He drew his Colt revolver from his holster, cocked the hammer slowly. The metallic click echoed sharply in the crisp, cold air around them. Sparing the animal a slow, agonizing death was the only mercy left. Put the gun down, Gabe. Celine's voice cut through his despair clearly. He whipped his head around. She was marching down the snowy slope from the cabin. She wasn't wearing her apron. She wore heavy wool, and in her gloved hand she carried the small locked leather satchel, the satchel she had meticulously kept hidden beneath her bed since arrival. He's done for, Celine. Gabe's voice cracked with exhaustion and grief. You shouldn't be down here. It's the fever. Highly contagious to herd. It is not a fever, and it is not a curse. Celine snapped, dropping to her knees in the snow beside Thunder. She didn't flinch at the mud or the sight of dying animal. She snapped the lock on her satchel, pulled it open with steady hands. Gabe stared in stunned silence, his gun lowering slightly from shock. Inside wasn't sewing gear or Bibles or any normal woman's belongings. It was lined with velvet and held a gleaming brass microscope inside rows of glass vials, surgical steel scalpels, leather-bound journals filled notes. What in God's name is all that? Gabe demanded, lowering revolver completely. Celine pulled out a pair of iron tweezers, a small glass vial. My real name is not Celine Harding, she said. Eyes intensely focused, her hands began to part the hair on Thunder's neck. Searching hide, it's Celine Miller. Does the name mean anything to you at all? Gabe frowned, searching his memory. Miller, like the fellow back east. The scientist the papers were calling a butcher and fraud years ago. My father, Celine said, her voice tightening with mix of pride. Old grief, Dr. Harrison Miller. He worked alongside Dr. Daniel Salmon in Washington, trying to prove that this Texas fever isn't carried by air or bad water, but by a vector, a parasite transmitted by ticks. She found what she was looking for. With a swift motion precise, she plucked a swollen, blood-engorged tick from the bull's hide completely, dropped it into a glass vial, sealed it tight with practiced movements. They laughed at him, Celine continued, her hands moving rapidly now. When the cattle barons realized his quarantine methods would cost money, would halt their cattle drives, they ruined him. Hired men to burn his laboratory. He died of a broken heart a month later. She drew a foul-smelling liquid from a large bottle into syringe. A heavy glass syringe with measurements marked precisely along the side. I was his lead assistant. I wrote half the papers they burned. Gabe watched spellbound as his mail-order bride, a woman he thought simple, expertly found a vein in the massive bull's neck. Injected dark liquid. Women aren't permitted to hold veterinary licenses, Celine said, looking up at Gabe finally, her green eyes blazing with defiance and fire, or work in the Bureau of Animal Industry. Can't touch livestock legally. I had the cure, Gabe. An arsenic and sulfur compound precisely measured that kills the parasite in the bloodstream if caught early enough, combined with an acaricide wash to kill the ticks on hide completely, but no rancher back east would let a woman touch animals at all. I was chased out of Pennsylvania. threatened with arrest for fraud. She stood up, her breath pluming in the cold air around them. I came west looking for a desperate man with a dying ranch, someone who had nothing left to lose. I needed a testing ground. She looked at him directly. I lied to you, Gabe Montgomery, completely. I used you for your land and your dying cattle for experiments. If you want to put me back on the stagecoach, I will go. But if you give me 2 weeks' time, I will save your ranch. I swear it on my father's grave. Gabe looked from the intricate medical tools to the fierce woman. The fierce, brilliant woman standing before him in frozen mud completely. The rugged mountain man felt a sudden, overwhelming surge of respect and intense, undeniable desire for her. For everything she represented to him, she wasn't just a survivor. She was a fighter. Just like him. Before Gabe could answer, the sharp crack of a breaking branch echoed from the timberline above. Gabe instantly raised his revolver again, his instincts taking over. Riding out of the trees were 4 men, on horseback, wearing heavy dusters. At the center of the pack rode Josiah Rutherford, his silver-tipped cane resting on his saddle horn, smugly, a predatory smile stretching across his face. "Morning, Montgomery," he called. "Looks like the reapers come to collect the last of your pride." "I brought the deed transfer. Bank says you're officially in default. In default by sundown today. I'm here to take Broken Ridge." Josiah Rutherford's laugh was a dry rattling sound, like snake rattles. He sat atop his polished black gelding, flanked by 3 hired guns. Woe's hands rested menacingly on their holstered irons, threat clear, obvious. Gabe didn't flinch. He stepped cleanly in front of Celine with body, his broad shoulders shielding her from Rutherford's predatory gaze completely now. The heavy Colt in his hand remained leveled at Rutherford's chest. "You're trespassing, Josiah." Gabe's voice was a low, dangerous rumble vibrating. "The bank ain't closed yet. Sundown is still 8 hours away," Rutherford sneered, leaning heavily on his silver-tipped cane with arrogance. "Technicality, Montgomery. I've already paid off your markers at Missoula, at the Missoula National. The land is mine. I just came courteously. Came to offer you the courtesy of packing your wagon first, before my men toss your belongings into the snow like trash. And I see you ordered yourself some comfort for your final days," he added, his eyes sliding over Gabe's shoulder to Celine watching everything. "Shame to drag a pretty little mail-order bride into your squalor." Before Gabe could cock the hammer of his revolver in fury, Celine stepped out from behind him, reached into her heavy wool coat, produced the loaded Remington Derringer Gabe hadn't realized she carried still. She aimed it squarely at the bridge of Rutherford's nose. "Unwavering, Mr. Rutherford," Celine said, her voice ringing out with terrifying composure clearly in Pennsylvania. "We shoot trespassers who threaten our livestock and husbands. I suggest you turn that horse around. If you return before deadline, I will put a bullet through your eye and dissect your brain. Dissect what is left of your brain under my microscope carefully." Rutherford's smug smile vanished. His hired men shifted nervously, unaccustomed completely, unaccustomed to women who spoke of dissection and held weapons steady. "Sundown on Friday," Rutherford spat, his face flushing with sudden rage. "I'll be back with Sheriff Ryman and a federal eviction notice. Enjoy your dead cows, Montgomery. Enjoy them while you still can." He yanked his reins. The 4 men galloped back up timberline, disappearing into the shadows of the pines. Gone but not forgotten, Gabe slowly lowered his Colt, staring at his wife in amazement. The adrenaline was pumping hard through his veins, mixing with realization, profound, awestruck realization. "You would have shot him without hesitation," he said. Celine slipped the Derringer back into her coat. "Yes," she said simply, picked up her leather satchel from the snow. "But bullets won't save ranch. We have 3 days until Friday. I need lumber, tar, horses, every able-bodied horse you have left." "We are building a dipping vat." That night, something shifted between them. Changed fundamentally and permanently, they sat by the fireplace. Coffee cooling in tin cups. Wind howling. The wind howling outside like it was trying to tear world apart. "Tell me about your father," Gabe said quietly. "The real story now, not just the polite version. I want to know the truth." Celine was silent for a long moment. weighing how much truth. He was a scientist, a researcher. He believed the world understandable through observation and evidence, that problems could be solved if you looked closely enough at the patterns, found the connections. What kind of scientist? Gabe pressed, wanting to know everything now. He studied disease, particularly in livestock, spent his life trying to understand how sickness moved, how to stop it completely. Gabe leaned forward. And did he stop it? He asked with hope. He found answers, but the people who needed to hear them refused. His research threatened powerful interests, so they destroyed him for it. Her voice hardened, burned his laboratory, ruined his reputation, killed him surely as if they'd put a gun to his head. Jesus. I'm sorry, Celine. Truly sorry, Gabe, with genuine sympathy. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Because they got away with it. The men who did it are still out there. Still powerful. Still destroying anyone who threatens their profits and control, she said. Gabe studied her carefully. This why you ran west? To escape them? Partly. And partly because I needed to finish what he started. Needed to prove him right. Needed to vindicate his name finally. How do you finish a dead man's work? He asked softly. She looked at him directly, let him see the determination burning behind her carefully controlled exterior. By proving he was right, by finding someone desperate enough to let me try it all. The words hung between them. Gabe's expression shifted, confusion. Then realization, Celine. What exactly are you saying to me right now? He asked. Before she could answer, a sound cut through the night air, a low, agonized bellow from the lower pasture. Thunder was moving. Gabe was on his feet instantly, grabbing his coat. That's thunder again. They ran through knee-deep snow, down toward the pastures in darkness. The bellowing got louder, more desperate, then stopped completely. Silence. Thunder was standing, weak, gaunt, ribs showing starkly against flanks yellow. His hide was stained a sickly yellow from the chemical treatment, but he was alive. He was tearing stubbornly at frozen winter wheat. Around him, the rest of the surviving herd was moving with purpose. The hollow, glazed look of impending death had vanished from eyes. The swollen, parasitic killers that had covered them were gone completely, leaving only shriveled dead husks in the snow. Empty tick shells, Celine's impossible cure, had worked. It had actually worked against death. Gabe let out a jagged, shuddering breath. Removing his wide-brimmed hat, "You did it," he whispered. "Jesus Christ, Celine, you actually did it." "We did it," she corrected. "You trusted me. That made it possible." He turned, desperate to hold her, to kiss her, to celebrate life. But a flash of movement near the timberline caught his eye. Celine wasn't looking at thunder. She was kneeling in mud elsewhere, near the geothermal runoff. A warm, natural spring that never froze. She was hunched over her open leather satchel, a brass magnifying glass clutched in her gloved hand, staring intently at the muddy embankment. "We won, Celine," Gabe called out, his voice thick with emotion. "They're standing." The fever broke. "We saved them," he said joyfully. Celine did not look up. Her face was pale, drawn tight terrifyingly, thickened tight with a cold fury. "It wasn't a fever, Gabe," her voice carrying a sharpness that stopped him dead in tracks. "And it wasn't a curse of the land or bad luck." Gabe frowned, his joy evaporating. Replaced by honed instincts sensing trap. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Moving closer to her, Celine pointed a trembling finger at the muddy bank of Warm Spring. "I came down here at dawn to gather soil samples for testing. I needed to understand how the Boophilus annulatus, the Texas tick, possibly survive a Montana winter. It should be impossible biologically." She stood up, kicking at a pile of dead brush piled unnaturally close to the water's edge. "They didn't survive winter. They survived the spring, the warm spring. Someone placed them here." Gabe stepped closer, pulling the heavy aside with strong hands. Buried beneath the dead pine needles were 3 massive burlap sacks, partially submerged in the steaming mud of the geothermal runoff completely. The stench hitting the cold air was putrid. The smell of rotting meat and stagnant blood. Death itself condensed. Gabe drew his hunting knife, slashed the nearest sack open violently. Hundreds of foul, rotting, tick-infested cattle hides spilled into mud. Someone deliberately brought infected hides up from the south, Celine said, her green eyes blazing. They dumped them right at your water source, specifically targeting the warm mud where the larvae could hatch safely, where larvae could attach themselves to your cattle. Drinking here regularly, they seeded your ranch with a biological plague. On purpose, deliberately, Gabe stared at the rotting hides. The faded red ink stamped on the burlap sack seemed to burn into his retinas. Rutherford Cattle Co., Missoula. The pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together in his mind. The mysterious deaths. Rutherford's perfectly timed buyout offers appearing quickly. The aggressive isolation of Broken Ridge from community support and help. It was warfare waged by a coward in a tailored suit. "I am going to kill him," Gabe growled, his voice stripped of all humanity. "I'm going to ride into Missoula today. Drag Josiah Rutherford into the street. Put a bullet through Hart." "No, you are not," Celine shouted, grabbing his thick arm hard. "If you shoot him, Gabe, you hang for murder immediately after. He takes the ranch and I become a widow before truly wife. We are going to use the law. I have the scientific proof. We will summon U.S. Marshal if we have to for justice." Dawn broke cold and clear over Broken Ridge Ranch that Wednesday morning, the kind of morning that made everything sharp. Every pine needle distinct, every breath visible, every sound carrying for miles across frozen valley below. Gabe stood at the kitchen window, coffee steaming in his scarred hands, watching the cattle in the lower pasture, 50 head, some healthy still, some dying slowly, all of them waiting for salvation or slaughter today. Today would decide which. Celine emerged from the back room already dressed, hair pinned back for work. Her hands were bandaged from chemical burns, her eyes shadowed from too many sleepless nights planning and calculating everything. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen in his life. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the enormity before them both. "No." "But we're doing it anyway," he replied, drinking the hot coffee. She moved to stand beside him, looked out at the cattle below, the cattle that represented everything, his past, their future. Her father's vindication. "The volunteers will be here within the hour. We need to move fast. The compound is mixed. The vat is sealed and ready. All we need now is muscle and faith," she said with determination. "Got plenty of the first. Working on the second," Gabe said honestly. She touched his arm. "Gabe, even if some don't make it today, even if we lose a few, this is still the right thing, I know." "Doesn't make it easier to watch them suffer," he admitted. "No, it doesn't," she agreed, squeezing his arm with gentle pressure. They stood there in the growing light. Two people who'd found each other through lies and desperation, now bound by something honest, something more honest than either had planned when this journey began together. The sound of wagons approaching pulled them apart from the quiet moment. The volunteers were arriving. Sarah Brennan came first with her husband, brought her husband Thomas, despite his protests about helping a woman, brought medical supplies and steady hands that had delivered 60 babies, hands that had tended the dying and brought life into the world. Jacob Weiss came with 3 other ranchers who'd lost cattle to fever, men with nothing left to lose and everything to prove to themselves. Even Reverend Mackenzie showed up, looking uncomfortable but determined to help. "I still think this is unnatural," he said to Celine directly. "Sarah convinced me that standing by while people suffer is worse and more unnatural. So I'm here to help and witness truth." "Thank you, Reverend," Celine said, genuinely grateful for his presence here. "Don't thank me yet. If this fails, I'll be first to say, I told you so," he added with honesty. "Fair enough," she replied, accepting the terms of his conditional support. Marcus Cole emerged from the barn. Some of the ranchers stiffened visibly, recognized him as Rutherford's man, a hired gun who'd worked against them. "He's with us now," Gabe said firmly. "He's testified about the hides, about the planted hides. He works for this ranch until done." The tension held for a moment. Then Jacob nodded slowly with understanding. "Everyone deserves a chance to make things right. Let's get working." Celine laid out the plan like a general before battle, carefully, like a general addressing troops Before a decisive engagement against death itself, we round up the cattle in groups of 10, drive them carefully, drive them through the chute into the dipping vat. The arsenic compound kills the parasites, but the animals need full submersion. Every inch of hide treated, it'll be hard work. Dangerous work? The chemicals will burn exposed skin. But it's the only way to save them, she stated with absolute conviction now. She paused, met each person's eyes. I can't promise every animal survives. Some are too far gone. But the treatment itself is risky and harsh. But without it, they all die. So we try, we fight hard, and we pray it's enough, she finished, her voice carrying authority. Let's get started, Gabe said. We've got maybe 8 hours of light. After that, we're working in the dark. Let's use the daylight. They moved out. The roundup was brutal from the very first moment. The sick cattle didn't want to move, had to be driven forcefully, cleaved. Sometimes physically dragged toward the corrals, and the chute waiting, Gabe rode Goliath hard, his massive frame driving the animals forward relentlessly, driving them forward through sheer force of will and strength combined together. The other ranchers worked their horses to exhaustion, cutting off strays carefully, breaking escape routes, creating a funnel toward the corral and vat. Celine stood at the vat, directing traffic, making sure each animal went under fully, counting seconds, pulling them out before arsenic became lethal, before the cure became the poison that killed instead of saved them. The work was relentless, backbreaking. By noon, they'd processed 20 heads successfully. By mid-afternoon, 40. The sun was sinking. They were running out of time. And then it happened. A young steer, already weak from fever ravaging, panicked in the chute, kicked, broke through a weak board with force, fell sideways into the vat, went under. Didn't come up at all. No, Gabe dove into the chemical bath. The arsenic burned his skin instantly. But he got his arms around the steer, hauled it up, dragged it out. The animal was unconscious, not breathing. Celine was there immediately, checking airway, starting compressions on the massive chest. Come on, breathe. Breathe, she commanded desperately. Nothing. Sarah knelt beside her. Let me try, she offered with experience. Together they worked. Compressions, rescue breathing, fighting death with everything they had, fighting death with skill and determination and refusal to accept defeat here. Finally, a cough, a gasp. The steer's eyes fluttered open slowly, alive. Celine sat back in the mud, hands shaking. That was close. Too close, she said, her voice trembling with relief and exhaustion. But he made it. Sarah gripped her shoulder. You saved him completely. Gabe climbed out of the vat, his skin red and blistered everywhere, his clothes soaked with chemicals. But his eyes were fierce and determined. Keep going. We finish this. All of them, he commanded with authority. They worked into the darkness. Lanterns hung on fence posts, casting wild shadows, making the whole operation look like some desperate midnight ritual to observers, which, in a way, it was. A ritual of science against superstition. Last calf went through the chute at 10 o'clock at night, too weak to stand on its own, carried by Gabe and Thomas, lowered gently into the compound, lifted out, laid carefully in clean straw. Then it was done. 50 cattle treated, most surviving, a few already showing signs of recovery, the hollow eyes filling with life again. The volunteers collapsed where they stood, exhausted, chemical burned, covered in mud, and desperation and hope mixed together on skin. Celine moved among them, treating burns, offering water, thanking each person carefully, thanking them with words that felt inadequate for what they'd given. When she finally stopped moving, Gabe caught her, literally caught her, falling. Her legs gave out. Easy. I've got you, he said gently. Did we do it? Did we save them? She asked weakly. We won't know for sure until morning. Celine? He held her close. You did everything humanly possible. The rest is fate. She buried her face against his chest, let herself shake with emotion, let herself feel the weight of the day pressing down hard. Around them, the volunteers were leaving, promising to return at dawn early to witness the results. Sarah paused beside them. You're either a miracle worker, or the most stubborn woman I've ever met. Can I be both? Celine asked, managing a small smile despite exhaustion. I suppose you can. Sarah smiled, tired but genuine. Get some rest. Get some rest, Dr. Miller. Tomorrow you change the world forever. Celine woke to Gabe, shaking her shoulder gently but urgently now. You need to see this, he said, his voice carrying something unreadable. She stumbled outside, still half asleep. The sun was just breaking over the mountains. In the lower pasture, the cattle were standing tall. Not all of them. 3 had died during the night, their bodies already stiff with cold. But 47 were alive and moving, eating, the hollow look gone from their eyes. The ticks dead and shriveled on their hides. It worked, Gabe breathed. Jesus Christ, Celine, it actually worked, he said with wonder and disbelief. She wanted to celebrate, to cry, to scream triumph at the sky, but there wasn't time, because today was Friday, and exactly at noon, Rutherford would arrive with the bank's eviction notice in hand. The cure had worked. The war wasn't over yet. Not even close. They spent the morning assembling evidence. Celine laid everything out carefully, laid everything out on the kitchen table like pieces of legal brief. The diseased hides with Rutherford's brand. Samples of Texas ticks that couldn't survive Montana winter naturally. Maps showing the planted caches precisely. Maps showing caches near geothermal springs. Marcus Cole's written testimony. Detailed testimony. Tailed. Damning. Naming names and dates and orders given by Rutherford, Jacob Weiss's timeline of his cattle deaths, starting immediately after his herd watered downstream from Gabe's spring. Sarah Brennan's medical observations of the cure's effectiveness, and Celine's father's journals showing identical patterns of biological warfare used in Pennsylvania years before. Letters warning Dr. Harrison Miller to stop his research. Signed by Rutherford, signed by J. Rutherford. Continental Cattle Syndicate. It's not enough, Celine said, staring at the evidence. Not quite. We can prove the hides. Prove the hides were planted. We can prove the ticks were introduced deliberately. But we can't prove Rutherford ordered it without Marcus's testimony. And a hired gun's word against a baron? That's shaky in court, she finished, frustrated by the legal weakness. What else do we need? Gabe asked, wanting to understand the gap. Financial records. Something showing Rutherford systematically acquiring foreclosed ranches. A pattern of behavior. Proof this isn't isolated but deliberate strategy. Gabe thought for a moment. Thaddeus Boone. The banker. He's processed every foreclosure in the valley for the past 5 years. He'd have those records, he said. Seeing the solution clearly now, would he testify? Celine asked, knowing the risk for the banker involved. I don't know. He's afraid of Rutherford, but he's also honest. An honest man forced to do dishonest things. If we give him a way out, a way to make things right safely, without losing everything. Gabe shrugged. Maybe. Just maybe he would help. Then we need to talk to him. Before Rutherford arrives here, they found Thaddeus Boone at the Missoula National Bank building downtown, a small nervous man with ink-stained fingers, and a conscience eating him. A conscience that had been eating him alive for years of complicity. When Celine laid out the evidence on his desk, his face went deathly pale. Dear God, he's been doing this deliberately. For years you knew, Gabe said, not an accusation. Just a statement of fact to suspected. Suspecting and proving are different things entirely, Boone said. And Rutherford owns half the businesses in Missoula. If I accused him without proof, I'd be ruined. Maybe worse than ruined. We have proof now, Celine said quietly. What we need from you are the financial records. Every ranch Rutherford acquired through foreclosure in the past 5 years. The purchase prices, the valuations. Show the pattern, she said, her voice gentle but firm with him. Boone's hands shook. He'll destroy me, he said with a genuine fear clear. He'll hang, Gabe said flatly. What we're showing here is federal crime, federal biological warfare. Deliberate transmission of quarantine disease across state lines. That's not a territorial court matter. That's federal marshals and judges. Rutherford's money won't save him, he stated with absolute certainty now, but I'll still lose my position. My reputation, Boone protested weakly. Or you'll be the banker who helped expose the biggest conspiracy. The biggest conspiracy in Montana Territory history. Celine leaned forward intently. Mr. Boone, I watched my father die because men like Rutherford valued profit over truth, watched his life's work burn, his name dragged through newspapers. Don't let that happen to more people. Be brave. Just this once, she urged with emotional intensity and honesty. Boone was silent for a long moment. Then he opened his ledger carefully. Friday noon, you said. That's when Rutherford is coming? Yes, Gabe confirmed, watching the banker's internal struggle play out visibly. Then you'd better take these copies now. Before I change my mind, he handed over thick folders, years of records. The pattern was undeniable. Undeniable. 14 ranches, all bought during foreclosure, all for a fraction of their value, all after mysterious cattle die-offs. Thank you, Celine said softly, taking the precious documents with gratitude. Don't thank me yet. Rutherford will know I'm the leak immediately. There are only so many people with access to these files. Then come with us, Gabe said. Testify yourself in front of witnesses, in front of the law. You'll be protected, he promised firmly. Will I, or will I just be the first casualty? Boone asked. There won't be a war, Celine said, because he's going to lose today, and you're going to be on the winning side. They returned to Broken Ridge at 11:30 in the morning precisely. Found half the town already there. Word had spread about the cured cattle, about the evidence, about the showdown coming at noon. Sarah and volunteers, the ranchers who'd helped with the roundup, even Reverend Mackenzie watching carefully, all gathered like spectators waiting for a hanging. Sheriff Tom Ryman was there too, looking tired and conflicted. Montgomery, Miss Miller, heard you've been making some serious accusations, he said, his tone neutral and careful. Not accusations, Sheriff, evidence. Celine gestured to the table on the porch where everything was laid out. Beside Ryman stood another man, older, wearing a federal marshal's badge, hard eyes that had seen everything and believed nothing until proven. This is Marshal Bidwell. Marshal Bidwell, Ryman said. Federal Circuit Judge sent him to investigate reports of quarantine violations in the territory. Thought he should be here. Celine felt hope flare in her chest. A federal marshal. Exactly needed, Marshal. Thank you for coming, she said, keeping her voice professional. Don't thank me yet, ma'am. I'm here to investigate all sides. That means looking at evidence from all sides. If you've made false accusations against a prominent businessman, you'll face consequences serious. Understood. The evidence speaks for itself, Celine said with confidence absolute. At exactly noon, the sound of multiple horses approaching echoed through the valley. Josiah Rutherford arrived like a conquering army, 6 men this time, including his lawyer, his hired guns, and a junior deputy, carrying official-looking paperwork. Rutherford dismounted with the smug confidence of a man who'd never lost a battle. Montgomery, I see you've gathered an audience for your eviction today. How thoughtful, he said. His eyes swept the crowd, paused on the federal marshal. Something flickered in his expression. Concern briefly. He covered it quickly. Time's up. The bank has declared your loan in default. Sheriff Ryman is here to serve notice. You have until sundown to vacate the property, he stated with authority. I'm not vacating, Gabe said calmly, his voice carrying across the gathering. Then you'll be removed by force, Rutherford threatened, gesturing to his men. On what grounds? The debt was predicated on loss of livestock completely. I haven't lost them. They're alive, recovering. The ranch is solvent. Rutherford's smile thinned. Temporary reprieve at best. The fever will return surely. It always does, he said with false certainty, masking growing unease. Not if the fever was never natural to begin with, Gabe stated. Silence fell like a stone. Rutherford's expression went carefully neutral immediately. I don't know what you're implying. He began with practiced innocence. I'm not implying anything. Celine stepped forward. I'm stating facts clearly. My name is Dr. Celine Miller, she announced, her voice carrying clearly, carrying the crisp cadence of a seasoned academic and trained researcher, daughter of Dr. Harrison Miller, former researcher for the United States Bureau of Animal Industry. I've spent the past 10 days investigating the cattle plague affecting this valley. She moved to the evidence table, picked up one of the rotting burlap sacks. This was found buried in the warm mud near Mr. Montgomery's geothermal spring, along with two others just like it. They contain cattle hides imported from Texas, deliberately infected with Bophelis annulatus, the Texas fever tick. She dropped the sack at Marshal Bidwell's feet. Note the brand stamped on the burlap. Rutherford Cattle Co., Missoula, she stated clearly. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rutherford's face flushed dark with anger. That's absurd. Those could have been planted by anyone attempting frame. A cheap attempt to frame me, he protested loudly with indignation. Then explain the wagon tracks, Celine continued, her voice steady. Clinical precision, leading from this location directly to your private rail siding, precisely mapped. Explain the testimony of Marcus Cole, your former employee standing there, who personally buried these hides on your orders, she said, without hesitation. Marcus stepped forward. It's true. Mr. Rutherford hired me and two others to plant diseased material near water sources, on targeted ranches, told us it was organic fertilizer. We didn't know what it really was, until one of our crew died from handling it, he testified, his voice carrying guilt and regret. Rutherford's lawyer jumped in. The word of a hired thug against a respected businessman? That's hardly credible evidence in any court. Then perhaps you'll find bank records more credible. Thaddeus Boone stepped forward, pale but resolute. He handed folders to the marshal carefully. 14 ranches acquired by Mr. Rutherford over 5 years, all through foreclosure following mysterious cattle die-offs, all purchased for 10 to 20% of their appraised value. The pattern undeniable. Marshal Bidwell opened the folders, began reading. His expression grew darker steadily, grew darker with each page. Furthermore, Celine said, my father documented identical tactics in Pennsylvania 6 years ago. Cattle companies using biological warfare to eliminate competition and acquire land cheaply through death. His laboratory was burned, his research destroyed, and I have correspondence showing warnings sent to him. Signed by J. Rutherford, agent for Continental Cattle Syndicate. She placed the letters beside financial records. The same man who now operates in Montana Territory, using the same illegal methods, transmitting quarantined biological materials across state lines, deliberately infecting livestock, violating federal agricultural law entirely, violating it for profit, she finished, her presentation complete and damning. The marshal looked up. His eyes were cold, Mr. Rutherford. These are serious charges, federal charges. Do you have any response? For the first time in his life, Josiah Rutherford looked genuinely afraid. This is a conspiracy. A woman scorned, a desperate rancher, a corrupt banker. They're in league against me falsely. Show him the microscope evidence, Marshal Bidwell said to Celine directly. She'd been waiting for this. Set up her brass microscope on the table, placed a slide under the lens. This tick was removed from Mr. Montgomery's cattle, Bophelis annulatus, native to Texas and the Gulf states. It cannot survive Montana winters naturally. The only way it reaches this latitude is through deliberate transport, she explained with scientific authority. The marshal looked through the microscope, saw the parasite magnified. Undeniable truth, I've also documented the tick life cycle. The warm mud near geothermal springs provides the only habitat where they could survive our winters. The placement of infected hides at these exact locations. These exact locations shows deliberate knowledge and intent, she stated with certainty. Rutherford's lawyer was scrambling. Even if the ticks were introduced deliberately, which we dispute. You can't prove my client was responsible for placement. Correlation isn't causation, he argued, grasping for legal technicalities desperately. Then arrest me, Marcus Cole said suddenly. I'll testify in federal court. In federal court, I'll describe every order, every location, every payment received in exchange for immunity. I'll give you Rutherford on a platter. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Rutherford's composure cracked visibly before everyone. You traitorous bastard, he began, stepping toward Marcus with rage. Enough, Marshal Bidwell's voice cut through the chaos. He looked at Ryman, looked at Sheriff Ryman. Tom, we need to detain Mr. Rutherford for questioning, Federal custody, he stated with complete legal authority now. On what charges? The lawyer demanded. What specific charges are being filed? Violation of federal quarantine law, deliberate transmission of controlled biological material, conspiracy to commit fraud. For starters, Bidwell's expression was granite hard. If half of what I'm seeing here holds up in court, holds up in federal court, we're looking at federal prison. Possibly more. Rutherford's face went from red to pale. He looked around desperately now, saw the town watching, saw the evidence laid bare, saw his empire crumbling, and made his decision. He drew a small derringer from inside his coat, aimed it at the marshal. I won't hang for this, he said, his voice shaking with desperation. Everything happened at once. Gabe lunged forward. Rutherford fired. The bullet went wide. Gabe's rifle stock came up in a brutal arc, caught Rutherford under the jaw with sickening crack. The cattle baron crumpled to the frozen ground. Unconscious, his hired guns reached for their weapons, then froze as a dozen rifles came up from the crowd. The ranchers, the volunteers, even Reverend Mackenzie held a shotgun with shaking hands but determined face. Don't, Sheriff Ryman said quietly. It's over. Put the guns down now. One by one they did. Holsters dropped to the dirt, hands raised in surrender. Marshal Bidwell knelt beside Rutherford's unconscious form, carefully. Someone get rope. Mr. Rutherford, you're under arrest, he stated officially. They dragged Rutherford away in chains, still unconscious from Gabe's blow, blood trickling from his mouth. The silver-tipped cane that had been his symbol of power now rolling in the mud. His hired guns were rounded up, questioned. Two confessed immediately. Corroborating Marcus's testimony. Desperate to save themselves from the federal noose, the lawyer tried to protest. Demanded due process. But Marshal Bidwell, was unmoved. Your client will get a trial. Federal Circuit Court, Helena. Until then, he's in federal custody, he said with finality. Absolute. He looked at Celine. Dr. Miller, I'll need you to prepare a formal report, scientific documentation. Everything you've found here documented. Can you do that? He asked, needing her expertise for prosecution. Yes, Marshal. I have journals, notes, specimens. Everything you need completely. Good. Because this is going to be the biggest case Montana Territory has seen in a decade. We need it. Airtight, absolutely. The crowd began to disperse, slowly, reluctantly, like witnesses to history unfolding. Witnesses to history who didn't want the moment to end yet. Sarah, Brennan approached Celine. You did it. You exposed him completely and thoroughly. We did it. All of us. Celine looked at the volunteers around, at the ranchers who'd helped. This was never just me alone fighting. Maybe not, but you were the catalyst. The one brave enough to start the fight, Sarah said with admiration clear. Jacob Weiss shook Gabe's hand firmly. Your ranch is saved, and you've got a hell of a woman, Montgomery, he said with respect. Don't I know it? Gabe replied, looking at Celine with love. Thaddeus Boone was talking to the marshal, pale but standing straight finally unburdened. Even Reverend Mackenzie approached Celine humbly now with apology. I was wrong about you. I apologize sincerely, he said with humility. You came when it mattered, Reverend. That's what counts most, she replied still. I let fear and prejudice cloud my judgment completely and wrongly. You're not a witch. You're a woman of science doing good. I should have seen that. From the start, clearly, he admitted, honestly. Thank you, she said simply, accepting his apology with grace and forgiveness. The sun was setting, painting the valley in gold and crimson light. The cattle were grazing peacefully. The evidence was secured for trial ahead. Justice was beginning. And Celine finally let herself breathe at last deeply. The trial in Helena lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of testimony and evidence. 6 weeks of legal maneuvering and desperate defense strategies that failed. Rutherford fought every charge, hired expensive lawyers from back east immediately, called in favors from powerful friends across the territory and beyond. It didn't matter at all. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Marcus Cole's testimony, detailed, consistent, corroborated by the other hired men, the financial records Thaddeus Boone provided, showing the systematic pattern of acquisition through foreclosure, 14 ranches over 5 years, all following outbreaks, the diseased hides with Rutherford's brand stamped clearly on every burlap sack, and Celine's scientific documentation, proving deliberate biological warfare beyond reasonable doubt, proving it with microscope slides, tick specimens, life cycle documentation, expert testimony. She spent 3 days on the witness stand, explaining the science clearly, explaining it in terms the jury could understand without condescension or confusion. The federal prosecutor was a sharp woman named Elizabeth Hartwell from Washington. From Washington, she questioned Celine with precision. Dr. Miller, can you explain? Explain to the jury how these ticks could not have arrived naturally? Celine answered clearly. The Boophilus annulatus tick requires specific conditions to survive. Warm temperatures, high humidity. Specific host animals for feeding. Montana's winter temperatures drop well below freezing. These ticks cannot survive exposure to prolonged cold. They die within days naturally. The only location on Mr. Montgomery's ranch where they could survive is the geothermal spring, where warm mud provides year-round warmth similar to their native Texas habitat, she explained with clarity, and the placement of the infected hides. Hartwell pressed with purpose, directly adjacent to the geothermal spring, precisely where the larvae needed to be to survive and attached to cattle drinking there. This shows deliberate knowledge of both tick biology and ranch geography. Not accident, not coincidence. Deliberate placement, Celine stated firmly. The defense tried to discredit her. Dr. Miller, you're not a licensed veterinarian. You have no formal credentials. Why should we trust your testimony? Celine met the lawyer's eyes. I spent 6 years working alongside my father, Dr. Harrison Miller, who worked with Dr. Daniel Salmon. With Dr. Salmon at the Bureau of Animal Industry, I co-authored research papers published in agricultural journals. My credentials are my research results. The cure worked. 47 cattle survived treatment. That's not opinion. That's documented scientific fact, she said with confidence. The defense attorney pressed. But women aren't permitted to hold veterinary licenses. How can we trust work done outside proper institutional oversight? Elizabeth Hartwell objected. Your Honor, Dr. Miller's gender is irrelevant to accuracy, to the accuracy of her scientific methodology and results achieved. The judge, a stern man named Morrison, agreed. Sustained. The defense will confine questions to the evidence presented, not the witness's gender, the trial continued. Jakob Weiss testified about his own ranch's destruction, about the timing, the same pattern, the same mysterious fever appearing suddenly, right after his cattle drank from the shared creek downstream from Gabe's geothermal spring. Sarah Brennan testified as medical expert witness, describing the cure's effectiveness. The scientific rigor observed. Thaddeus Boone presented the financial records, showed the judge and jury clearly, showed them the pattern of systematic acquisition at pennies on dollar, and Marcus Cole. Marcus Cole testified for 2 full days, describing everything, describing every order Rutherford gave, every location where hides were planted, every payment received, Every conversation about removing obstacles to expansion, the defense tried to break him. You're a criminal seeking immunity. Why should we believe anything you say? The lawyer attacked aggressively. Because I'm the one who did it, Marcus said simply, with honesty. I planted those hides. I took his money. I followed orders blindly. And I watched a man die from handling diseased material we buried. I'm not proud. But I'm telling the truth now, he stated clearly. On the final day, Elizabeth Hartwell gave her closing argument powerfully. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not complicated fundamentally. Mr. Rutherford used biological warfare to destroy competing ranches systematically, to destroy them so he could acquire land cheaply. He weaponized disease, weaponized a parasite that kills cattle, placed it deliberately at water sources, and then waited for ranchers to fail so he could buy their life's work for nothing. This is not business competition. This is criminal conspiracy. Federal biological warfare, premeditated economic murder through disease. She paused. Let the word sink in. Dr. Selene Miller risked everything to expose this conspiracy. She tested her cure publicly. She documented the evidence meticulously. She presented scientific proof undeniable, and because of her courage, because of her brilliant scientific work, we now know the truth. Josiah Rutherford is not a businessman wronged. He is a criminal who belongs in federal prison, she concluded. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned with a verdict unanimous, guilty, on all counts. Violation of federal quarantine law, conspiracy to commit fraud, interstate transmission of controlled biological material. The judge sentenced Josiah Rutherford, sentenced him to 20 years in territorial prison. His assets were seized. His cattle company dissolved. The ranchers he'd cheated received settlements fair. Justice. Slow and imperfect, but real. Selene sat in the courtroom and felt her father's presence. Felt vindication. 3 months later. Spring came to the Bitterroot Valley like promise kept. Snow melted. Creeks ran high and clear. The pastures turned green gradually, and Thunder sired the first calf of the new breeding season successfully. A healthy heifer, strong and perfect, no sign of fever anywhere. Selene named her Hope. The name felt right, felt like closure somehow. Selene's research was published in agricultural journals across the country widely. The cure for Texas fever, verified and replicable. Her father's name cleared posthumously. Dr. Harrison Miller's work was recognized as pioneering, finally essential, worthy of the respect he'd been denied in life unjustly. The dedication in the published paper read, "To Dr. Harrison Miller, whose courage his daughter carried forward. May truth always triumph over profit." Letters arrived at Broken Ridge almost daily, from ranchers thanking her sincerely, from veterinary schools asking her to lecture, from the Bureau offering positions that she politely declined. She had work to do here in Montana. Sarah Brennan became her first student completely, learning microscopy and disease diagnosis, planning to open the valley's first combined medical and veterinary practice for all. Other women followed, curious, brave, ready to learn from her expertise. The world was changing, slowly, but inevitably forward toward progress and equality. On a warm May afternoon, Selene stood in the lower pasture peacefully, 47 head of healthy cattle grazing peacefully, new calves gambling between them. The nightmare of the previous winter now just a memory, fading slowly. Gabe came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist gently. She leaned back into him. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said softly. "I was thinking about my father, wishing he could see this, see that his work mattered, that he was right all along. He knows. Wherever he is, he knows," Gabe said with certainty. "You think so?" she asked, hoping it was true somewhere beyond life. "I do, and I think he's proud of the cure you achieved, of the justice, of the life you're building here with me." He paused. "Of the woman you've become," he added with love. Selene turned in his arms. "I wouldn't be here without you completely. You gave me the chance when no one else would dare. We gave each other chances. That's what partnership is truly," he said. She kissed him, soft and slow, tasting of coffee and spring grass and home. When they pulled apart, she smiled. I got a letter. Got a letter yesterday from the Territorial Agricultural Board requesting my help. They want to commission a study. Cattle disease patterns across Montana carefully. Year-long project. Good funding for research, she explained with excitement building. You going to take it? He asked, knowing her answer already somehow. Only if you help. It's our ranch, our work together always. We do it together, or not at all, she said firmly. Then we do it together, he agreed, kissing her forehead gently. They walked back toward the cabin, hand in hand, past the dipping vat that had saved the herd completely that winter, past the barn where it had all begun, past the porch bravely, past the porch where they'd fought their war and won together. Inside, Celine's microscope sat on the table beside Gabe's rifle carefully positioned. Two tools, two ways of fighting, both necessary, both respected equally now. On the wall hung a framed letter, the first page of publication, the first page of her father's published research. Dedicated to his daughter, the woman who'd finished what he started courageously. Below it, photograph. Celine and Gabe on their wedding day smiling, married by Reverend Mackenzie in front of the whole town watching joyfully, no longer scandalous, just accepted. This was home now, completely and truly. Not just a ranch, not just a refuge from Eastern society, but a life built on honesty and hard work together, and the belief that truth, spoken clearly, could still win against corruption. The Montana sun set golden through the windows. Thunder bellowed peacefully outside. Hope nursed at her mother's side. And in the quiet evening air, two people who'd found each other through desperation discovered something better enduring, better than survival. They discovered purpose, partnership, peace everlasting always together, the kind that lasts, the kind worth fighting for always and forever. That night, Celine sat on the porch, writing in a new journal, starting fresh, recording not just science but life. May 15th, 1884. The cattle are healthy. The valley is healing, and I have found something I never expected to find here. A partner, an equal, a man who sees beyond what society says I should be, who values my mind as much as heart, Father. I wish you could meet him. You would like Gabe. He's stubborn like you, believes in truth like you, fights like you, and he gave me the chance to prove you were right. The cure works. The science is sound. Your name is cleared, but more than that, I found a home, a purpose beyond just vindication. I'm teaching, sharing the cure, saving lives daily. This is what you wanted. For science to serve people freely, I'm doing that now, and I'm happy. Truly happy at last. She closed the journal, looked out at the mountains silhouetted against stars, agate stars. Gabe came out, sat beside her, handed her coffee. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky wheel overhead. What are you thinking? He asked after a long while peacefully. I'm thinking about how I came here planning to use you, to take what I needed and move on to next thing. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being about revenge or proof and started being about this. You, us, the life we're building. Gabe pulled her closer. You saved my life in more ways than just the cattle. You saved me from giving up completely, from accepting that failure was inevitable. You taught me hope again. We saved each other, she said, resting her head on his shoulder. Yeah, we did, he agreed, kissing the top of her head. They sat there as the temperature dropped, as the stars grew brighter, as the mountains stood silent and eternal around their small valley. Tomorrow they'd start the new researcher project, begin documenting disease patterns, parse across the territory, saving more ranchers, spreading the cure widely. Tonight they just sat. Two people who'd fought death together and won. Two people who'd found love in the most unlikely place, in the frozen Montana winter of 1883, where a woman with a microscope and a secret had saved more than cattle. She'd saved a man's faith, a valley's livelihood, and her father's legacy. And in doing so, she'd found herself, found her purpose, found home. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of spring flowers, of new grass, of possibilities. Gabe tightened his arm around her. I love you, Celine Miller Montgomery, he said simply and honestly. I love you, Gabe Montgomery. She replied, her heart full and content, and under the vast Montana sky, two souls who'd found each other rested in the knowledge that they'd built something that would last, something bigger than themselves, a legacy of truth, of courage, of love, the kind that changes the world. One cattle ranch at a time, years later. Final reflection years later, when people asked Celine Miller Montgomery about that winter long ago, about the cattle plague and the conspiracy and the 3-day war, she'd smile. Science saved the cattle, she'd say with quiet pride always, but it took courage to use it. Gabe's courage to trust me, mine to try, and a community's courage to see truth clearly. They'd ask if she regretted the lies. The deception used initially, using a mail-order bride advertisement to test her cure secretly then, I regret nothing that led me here. She'd answer honestly always now, to this life, this work, this man. Sometimes the crooked path forward. The crooked path is the only one that gets you home safely. And Gabe, listening from the porch, would shake his head smiling always, because he knew the real truth, that a woman with a microscope and a dangerous secret had ridden into his dying valley, saved his cattle, exposed a conspiracy, completely avenged her father, and stolen his heart all in one impossible winter. She'd come as Celine Harding. A lie. She'd stayed as Celine Miller. The truth became Celine Montgomery completely forever. The future. The woman who proved that in wild Montana territory still, in the brutal winter of 1883, science and courage could beat superstition and greed. That truth spoken clearly could still win. That one person willing to fight could change everything around them. Thunder's descendants would graze those pastures for generations coming forward always, healthy, strong, proof that the cure worked, that the battle meant something, and the woman who'd saved them would be remembered not as a witch or a fraud, but as a pioneer always, the scientist who tamed the fever, the fighter who brought justice forward, the partner who built a life worth living in the shadow forever, in the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains, where the wind howled cold in winter. But spring always came, and with it hope.